What if I told you that while everyone was watching one story unfold, the real story, the one that'll actually affect your wallet, your gas prices, and America's future, was happening in the background? On January 3rd, 2026, something happened in Venezuela that might have just changed everything. And I'm not talking about what you saw on the news. Look, I need to be straight with you from the start. What I'm about to share isn't going to make me popular with everyone, but it's a conversation we need to have. Because while the headlines are screaming one thing, there's a completely different story playing out, one with massive implications for all of us. So here's what happened. In the early morning hours of January 3rd, around 2 a.m. local time, over 150 American military aircraft flew into Venezuelan airspace. Explosions lit up Caracas, the power grid went dark, and within half an hour, a special operations team had extracted Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife from inside their most secure military compound. By sunrise, Maduro was on a Navy ship headed to New York to face narco-terrorism charges. President Trump called it one of the most powerful displays of American military capability in our history. He announced we'd be running the country until further notice. Now, before you click away thinking this is just another political rant, hear me out. Because what I'm about to explain affects you whether you're Republican, Democrat, or couldn't care less about politics. Here's the part almost nobody's talking about. Just hours before that raid, Maduro was in a meeting. And he wasn't meeting with some random diplomat. He was sitting across from China's special envoy for Latin America, discussing oil exports and what they called building a multipolar world. The timing? Not an accident. Let me break down why this matters to you, sitting at home in America, trying to make ends meet. Venezuela sits on roughly 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That's not a typo. To put that in perspective, that's more than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than Canada and Iraq combined. We're talking about nearly 18% of all the oil on planet Earth. Now here's where it gets interesting and complicated. Venezuela's oil isn't the easy stuff. It's not like Saudi oil that flows out of the ground ready to go. This is heavy, thick crude loaded with sulfur. It's expensive to extract and needs special refineries to process it. And guess where most of those refineries are? Right here, along the Gulf Coast, built 50 years ago specifically to handle this exact type of oil. See, America produces tons of oil from shale, sure. But that's light crude. Our refineries, the ones making diesel for trucks, jet fuel for planes, the lubricants that keep our entire logistics network running, they were designed for the heavy stuff from Venezuela. For decades, this worked perfectly. Venezuela pumped, we refined, everybody made money. Then came Hugo Chavez, then nationalizations, then sanctions, and then China stepped in. This is where most news coverage completely drops the ball. The relationship between China and Venezuela didn't just pop up yesterday. This has been brewing for 25 years. Back in 2001, Venezuela became the first Latin American nation to sign a strategic partnership with China. Since 2005, China has loaned Venezuela nearly $60 billion. That's double what they've given any other Latin American country. But these weren't normal loans. They were oil for financing deals. Venezuela got the cash they desperately needed. China got guaranteed oil shipments and a foothold in our backyard. Chinese state-owned companies built railways, telecommunications networks, infrastructure projects. They essentially became the bank and the builder when Western institutions shut Venezuela out. But here's the kicker. About 85% of Venezuela's oil production now goes to Chinese refineries. China built specialized facilities just to process this heavy Venezuelan crude. They created the infrastructure. They trained the people. They made themselves absolutely essential. And then, in May 2024, pay attention to this, China and Venezuela signed an investment protection agreement. This wasn't big news in our media, but it was huge. It created a legal framework protecting Chinese companies and assets in Venezuela, no matter what happens politically. Beijing was preparing for exactly what just went down. So when American forces grabbed Maduro, we walked into a country where China has spent 2 decades building deep roots. We seized a leader who literally hours earlier was discussing expanded cooperation with Chinese diplomats. And here's where it gets really interesting. China's response? They called it deeply shocking and a blatant violation of international law. They demanded Maduro's release. But notice what they didn't do. No military threats, no sanctions, no severing diplomatic ties. Instead, Chinese officials made it clear. They intend to keep working with whoever ends up running Venezuela. The oil will keep flowing regardless. That's not weakness, folks, that's strategy. Think about it, China doesn't need to control the government to control the resources. They control the infrastructure, they control the shipping, they control the refining capacity, they control the debt. The billions in infrastructure they built over 20 years doesn't disappear because we removed one guy. Meanwhile, we're now responsible for managing a country of 30 million people with no clear exit plan. Venezuela's economy has shrunk by 75% over the past decade. Hyperinflation destroyed their currency. Millions of people have fled. We're now on the hook for electricity, water, basic services, everything. China gets to sit back, maintain relationships, offer help when needed, and wait. Because they know something Washington apparently forgot. Invading is easy. Occupying is expensive. Now let me show you something that should genuinely concern every American, regardless of your politics. The global reaction to this operation wasn't what you might expect. It wasn't just Russia and China condemning it. Brazil, our biggest partner in South America, called it an unacceptable line being crossed. Mexico's president said intervention has never brought democracy to Latin America. Colombia, Chile, Uruguay, Spain, countries that trade heavily with us, countries that didn't even recognize Maduro's last election, they all united in condemnation. Not because they love Maduro, but because, in their words, this looked like imperial theft dressed as liberation. The UN Security Council convened. Jeffrey Sachs, the Columbia economist, put it bluntly. The issue isn't Venezuela's character. The issue is whether any country can use force to determine another nation's political future. And here's what should keep you up at night. For years, China has been positioning itself as an alternative to American-led institutions. Through BRICS, through their Belt and Road Initiative, through alternative banking systems, they've been building parallel financial structures that don't rely on the dollar. And we just handed them the best recruitment tool imaginable. Every warning Chinese diplomats ever made about American power, every speech about American hegemony, we just proved them right in the most dramatic way possible. Look at the numbers. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped to 58%, the lowest since 2000. Central banks added over 1,000 tons of gold in 2024 alone, looking for alternatives to dollar assets. China and Russia trade mostly in yuan and rubles now. Brazil and China trade in their own currencies. And here's the big one. Saudi Arabia, the kingdom whose 1974 agreement created the entire petrodollar system. They're now accepting yuan for oil sales. Think about what we just showed every oil-producing nation. Defy Washington. Price your resources outside the dollar system, and American forces might show up at 2 a.m. Saudi Arabia is watching. The UAE is watching. Every resource-rich nation in Africa and Asia is watching. And they're all reaching the same conclusion. Maybe holding dollar assets isn't as safe as we thought. Maybe we need alternatives. China's payment system now links nearly 5,000 banks across 185 countries. They're building digital currency platforms with Saudi Arabia, Thailand, and others that settle instantly without touching American banks. These are the escape routes being built right now. And our Venezuela operation didn't slow this down. It sped it up. Look, I'm not saying the operation wasn't impressive from a military standpoint, suppressing air defenses, paralyzing ground forces, extracting Maduro in under 30 minutes with only 7 injuries. That's undeniably skilled execution. But military competence isn't the same as strategic wisdom. We've proven we can capture anyone, anywhere, anytime. We've proven our military dominance is unmatched. But we've also proven we don't care about international law when it's inconvenient. We've shown that sovereignty is negotiable if you have something we want. Every country with resources is now asking, are we next? And China doesn't even need to say anything. They just need to keep offering loans without regime change requirements. They need to keep investing regardless of who's in charge. They need to show that partnering with Beijing doesn't come with the threat of midnight raids. Here's the irony that's almost too perfect. We launched this operation partly to secure Venezuelan oil and counter Chinese influence in our hemisphere. The result? We've confirmed every suspicion about American intentions and accelerated exactly the realignment we were trying to prevent. Trump mentioned on Fox that part of this was about Venezuela stealing from American companies during nationalizations back in 2006-2007. He talked about American companies rebuilding Venezuela's oil industry. But here's reality. Venezuela's oil production has collapsed from 3.5 million barrels a day in the late 90s to about 960,000 barrels now. Experts say it would take $180 billion over 15 years just to restore former production levels. Even maintaining current output needs $50 billion. American oil companies have long memories. They remember the nationalizations. They remember the seizures. They're not going to commit that kind of money without ironclad guarantees. Meanwhile, Chinese companies never left. They adapted. They built relationships. They demonstrated patience that our corporations, pressured by quarterly earnings, simply can't match. As I'm recording this, Maduro sits in a federal detention facility in New York. His wife is with him. The Venezuelan government continues operating under the vice president. The military remains intact. The intelligence services still function. We removed the figurehead, but the system remains. International law experts have been clear. This violated the UN Charter. It qualifies as a crime of aggression under international law. The UN Secretary General expressed deep alarm. But international law only matters if someone enforces it. And who enforces it against the country that controls the enforcement mechanisms? That's the question China's been asking for years. That's the question the rest of the world is now answering by building systems that don't require American approval. Here's what I think is really happening and why you should care. This isn't about one military operation. This is about trust. It's about legitimacy. When you rule only through fear and force, eventually people find alternatives. The petrodollar system that's propped up American financial dominance since 1974, it's not dying just because of Chinese competition. It's dying because we've turned our currency from a neutral tool into a political weapon, and now a literal weapon. Every nation is recalculating. Can their dollar reserves be frozen? Can their leaders be indicted? Does sovereignty mean anything when American interests are involved? And the answers they're reaching will reshape everything. Don't watch the headlines about military victories and captured dictators. That's the show. Watch the bank vaults. Watch the currency agreements. Watch the gold purchases. Watch which nations start pricing exports in yuan or local currencies. Watch BRICS expand. That's where the real story is. The era of unchallenged American dominance didn't end on January 3, 2026. It's been ending for years. But this operation might be remembered as the moment when the facade finally cracked, when the rules-based international order was revealed as American control with better marketing. We can refill strategic reserves. We can maintain refineries. We can secure oil flows. But trust, once broken, doesn't easily return. Legitimacy, once thrown away, is hard to rebuild. And an empire that rules only through fear eventually learns that fear is the weakest foundation for power. The world is watching. The world is drawing conclusions. And those conclusions are going to affect gas prices, inflation, the dollar in your pocket, and America's place in the world for decades to come. I'm not telling you what to think about this. I'm just asking you to think beyond the headlines, to see the bigger picture. Because the changes happening right now, they're going to shape the rest of our lives. If this breakdown helped you see what's really going on, hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment with your thoughts. I actually read them. Share this with someone who needs to see past the surface story. The old order is fading. A new one is being born. The only question is, will you understand the world that's coming or be caught off guard when it arrives? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.